Okay. So good evening, everyone. I'm Catrin, and I'm really pleased that we've got Georgia Powell here from the Goldsmiths as well, who's going to tell us about the show. So Georgia's the assistant curator at the Goldsmiths Company, and she's been responsible for sort of every element of this show, really. So it's fantastic to have her tell us about the objects and the concept behind the show as well this evening. So as Josh said, the format is going to be we'll talk you through the show down here, and then we're going to head up to the ballroom and have an opportunity to have a look at the show. I suppose it is midway through the installation, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you'll get to see a bit of behind the scenes, but there's also things that will, reflect the finished article as well. So I think it should be an interesting time to sort of see a bit behind the scenes of what we're doing up there at the moment. So. Well, Georgia, do you want to say hello?
Yeah. Hello. So, as Catrin was saying, I work for the Goldsmiths Company, and you may have heard the name from a few years. Was it 2 years ago? The exhibition?
Well, I suppose Silver Light and Shade opened the end of 2016.
Yeah, and that's when we sort of started to get to know each other and start this partnership. But it's actually a long partnership with the museum because didn't the company fund?
Well, I suppose the Holborns had obviously a long-standing connection with showing silver and also with the company because I think before Silver Light and Shade, I don't know, there's definitely sort of ongoing relationship.
I remember seeing you on the windows up there used to be these bubbles about the history of the museum.
That's true.
And there was a bit saying that when the museum was founded.
I've forgotten all about those.
I remember seeing our names saying that we helped start the museum.
Oh God! What is that? As far back as the 1890s. See, look at this. It sounds like a scripted conversation, doesn't it?
I think that is the case.
No, that's really interesting. Well, I will definitely look into that and find out more. So perhaps we'll have a nice update in the next volunteer newsletter.
But we're really keen. So that exhibition that you put on a couple of years ago, has started this conversation, and that's really where this started. You also talked about that exhibition at our annual selling event, Goldsmiths Fair, last year.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's where we sort of started talking about this. So the basic kind of premise for the exhibition was that we wanted to showcase contemporary silver alongside other crafts, which again is perfect for this venue. So what we did is we went about commissioning silver pieces specifically for a table, but we needed a table first.
I'm going to jump back to this one.
Back and forth. So we have been established as a company. We're about to turn 700 years old. So we got our royal charter in 1327. But there's evidence to suggest that we've been on the site, which is just by St Paul's Foster Lane in the City of London, since about 1100. So there was a guild set up by 11 goldsmiths. And we've basically been there ever since. So we were set up specifically to support the craft of goldsmithing. Goldsmithing is probably quite an old-fashioned term now, which we generally refer to jewellers and silversmiths, but we've had that name since the beginning, so we can't really change it at this stage. So we're the Goldsmiths Company, so we're there specifically to support our craft. And we do that in many ways. The piece that I'm related to is the collection. So as we've been there for so long, we've always been patrons of our craft. We commission things for use at Goldsmiths Hall, which is a lovely thing. It's not like a museum collection. These things are actually used. So a lot of the pieces you'll see upstairs are used at dinners and functions. And because, like I say, we've been around for so long, the collection now amounts to about 9,500 pieces that are all made from precious metal. And we have this collection, so we need to showcase it. So each year, basically, we organise an exhibition. I also process loans to other institutions, like we did for Silver Light and Shade a few years ago. And we constantly commission new work. So we are encouraging young makers, emerging makers, and as well as pushing kind of more established makers in new directions. So we have a committee specifically set up to commission pieces each year. The other way that we support the craft is through the assay office. So at the end of the 15th century, an assay office was set up at the hall, and that's where the term hallmark comes from, because objects were taken to Goldsmiths Hall to be hallmarked. So they'll be hallmarked with the date letter, the assay office. So there's 4 working assay offices in the UK. So we'll get the London hallmark and the Maker's mark, which defines that piece to an individual maker. So that helps to keep the standards for precious metals in the UK. And then another
That's
thing,
about testing the purity of
it's
the
testing.
materials
So
that
the one that
isn't
you're
it?
probably most familiar with is 925, which you'll see on sterling silver, which is, it's on most pieces of jewelry, which basically means that that object is 92.5% silver, that it's mixed with other metals. So that's the kind of well-known hallmark. And then, so there's old processes where they take scrapings from metal to test it, but there's also now new technology which allows you to test it in a much kind of less abrasive way.
Do they use XRF scanning?
XRF, yeah, but there are still things that they do scrapings from, which obviously the makers aren't particularly pleased with.
Yeah, you work really hard to get that finished.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so there are some things that they do take a tiny sample, and it is minute now. But we've got some objects in the historic collection where there's a big piece. They really wanted to test it. And then the most kind of more recent addition to the company's outreach is Goldsmith Centre, which is our training facility in Farringdon, so about a mile away from our main Goldsmiths Hall, which trains all of our apprentices. We still run an apprenticeship scheme. So young makers will go there at 16, and it's also a base really for practicing makers. So there's about 30 workshop spaces that they can rent out at a lesser kind of fee than what you'd expect in London, and there's just constantly training going on, courses. So that's basically what the company is. So as I said, we have a collection that we exhibit as a way of promoting the craft, and this was an idea. We wanted to, I think silversmithing is a bit of a, would you say it's not a dying craft, but I think it's probably less well known and appreciated than other contemporary craft, would you say? That's a fair statement.
I think it's an interesting question actually, because I think there's a lot happening in terms of there are new makers, but in itself, because the skills are so specialised, the materials are costly, and to set up as a studio to actually become a maker, I think is very difficult.
It's a big sacrifice.
So even though there's a lot of interesting things going on with contemporary silversmithing, it's something that it's nice to have the maybe a focus or opportunity to kind of show work or commission work like this.
Yeah, well,
there's not that many opportunities to do something.
And obviously we're not naive to the fact that it is a precious metal and therefore it is expensive, so maybe it's seen as less accessible. But what we're trying to say with this table display, where we're showing it alongside the furniture maker I mentioned, contemporary glass makers and ceramicists, actually this piece shows a textile which won't be shown upstairs. We've had to adapt the exhibition for the different venues, but what we're trying to show is showing silver maybe as you might not have seen it before. You're probably used to seeing it in showcases in museums locked away, and you don't have any kind of connection to it. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to show that these people are still making domestic pieces for use at the table. So as well as the table display, we've got in the other venues we had full showcases of introducing the collection. So we've got what's happening today, but I wanted to also show the history of the collection and how we've always commissioned or purchased pieces specifically for use at the table. So upstairs, all of these pieces that are in the full showcases in the other venues are in the long purpose-built. It's like it was made for this exhibition.
Yeah. So the title "Made for the Table," I think it applies particularly well to the Holborn, because we're using our sort of 7.5 metre table to display these pieces which were made for a table. Yeah. So it's a kind of nod to the way that we use the display space to show things from our own collection. But here we've got an amazing selection of things from the Goldsmiths Company's collection. So we've got 2 tables, and I think that's going to be one of the challenging things to talk to you about the show, is actually how we've divided up the space and what's going on our table and also the other table. And that will all make more sense in a minute, I think. Yeah.
But just to show you what we're seeing here, you've got objects. So the earliest object is 1542. So I'm trying to say that although people, Addy Tock, who was in Silver Light and Shade, is making peppers, salt and pepper sets, that's a tradition that's gone back presenting salt on the table is not a new thing. It goes back to the Renaissance. So that's what we're trying to.
So there are 4 themes.
There are 4 themes, yeah. Flavour, drink, light, and dine. So they all relate to objects for use on the table, hence the title. This is at the previous venue. So just to give you the context, it started off at Harley Gallery in Nottinghamshire. It was there over winter, and then it's literally just come here yesterday from Ruthin Craft Centre up in North Wales, and this is it at Ruthin. So this, you'll see the 4 cases I was talking about with the main table.
But it's also a particularly kind of interesting image because, again, as you'll see when we get upstairs, the show won't look identical to this at the Holborn. But I think here you can see very well the interplay between that table setting and the historic items on show. So although part of the display is, in that traditional museum sense, their objects in showcases, we're also showing things outside showcases, things on open display, and it's very much about, making the point that actually these things did have a function. They were actually for use on the table.
Yeah.
Another nice view.
This is just another view of the setting.
So this is at Ruthin, is it?
This is at Ruthin, yeah. And you'll see in the background, as well as the textile, we also commissioned some images, which you can't really see here, but there's some further on.
We'll come on to those in later in the presentation as well. But I think this quite nicely shows the idea of all the different crafts together in one space. So
this is Ruthin again. Just shows the different angles that are coming into the space. And they actually commissioned another exhibition to go alongside it. So all the pieces that you see here were for sale, but I know you're going to have some silver in your shop.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we did for Silver, Light and Shade, we invited different makers to sell things in the shop. And obviously we've kept some of those for, since Silver, Light and Shade in the shop, but we're also going to be having particular makers. Again, there are people represented in the exhibition who are also for sale in the shop as well. So it's, I think we're keying that, as well as showcasing the historic silver, it is a reminder that it's a contemporary craft, and actually that's an important part of what we're trying to show with the exhibition as well. So the next thing I'm going to show you is actually the material that we've got to go alongside the exhibition. And we're going to talk you through the objects in the table setting, but we've got a gallery guide, which, so you can see it has the image on the front. And when you open it, what you have is a kind of tabbed guide, which actually makes you, allows you to easily navigate the different sections of the exhibition. So this is to help visitors to learn about the objects on the table. So when I say on the table, I mean our table, the one that's normally there. So the idea with this gallery guide is that you can see through the different sections. So you've got flavour, drink, light and dine, and you can actually flick through and see all the objects and information about them when they were made. It's very easy to find them because they've all got the images, so you can easily match up the text with the object. But the particular reason that we produced this is that for this show we haven't got any labels in the case. So the objects alone are on the table, but you can find out here, and you can carry this around. We'll have quite a lot of copies of this in the gallery. Obviously not for people to take away, but there'll be enough that any visitor will be able to carry it around with them and actually discover more about the object as they go around. So this is effectively the label text in a kind of portable form. And as well as the label text for the different sections, it also includes a glossary, so information about the sort of key terms of silversmithing and information about the Goldsmiths Company in the collection as well. And it also, in the final tab, has the events that we have alongside the show. So I'm going to pass this round so that you can have a look at it as we talk. But we're just going to talk you through some of the key objects and the connections with our own collection as well. So
so what's nice about having this way of interpreting things as well is that it again moves away from the kind of more traditional label in the showcase, because it just leaves the objects on the table kind of a bit more relevant to the theme of the exhibition.
Here, the goldsmith's one.
Is that a 1740? So
yeah, 1770. So that yours is earlier.
Yeah.
So you can.
So this particular piece was made, as I said, lots of things were made for use at the company. So this, just in case we forget, has a massive silver copy of our coat of arms on the front, just to hone that in.
Our one has the Holborn's coat of arms.
Oh, does it? There we go.
Does, yeah.
As well as each piece individually, each silver piece has the coat of arms engraved on it as well.
So again, can I just apologise that some of these are looking a little bit out of focus, or it might just be my tired eyes after the days of install. You can see that banding, the selected areas of decoration, gilded, and of course there is a functional aspect to gilding as well as a sort of visual one, because you see the insides of salts often gilded because otherwise the metal corrodes. Yep, just our bell salt for fun. And actually, we've shown the goldsmith's salt fully assembled in this exhibition, and also our salt is still in its normal home and it's disassembled. So a reminder of how they look sort of in both ways. So it's quite a nice opportunity to see those together.
So again, it has a function. So the base would have been the salt that was passed around, as far as I'm aware, and then the top, because it was covered, it was preserved for the host. But I didn't actually. I was endlessly trying to research why you
need so many salts.
No, but why the bell shape?
Yeah.
Apparently Queen Elizabeth I had one in her collection, which made it fashionable. But other than that, I couldn't find.
Yeah. No, it's a really surprising shape that it had such longevity. Really, I mean, but then there's not that many surviving examples. It's kind of, they must have been high status things for that many to still be in existence. So, and you might recognise the second salt down. There are some slightly less elaborate equivalents of those in Holborn's silver as well. Those sort of three-footed, quite sort of rounded shapes that you see in there. Although these, again, by Paul Storr. So a name that you might remember from Silver Light and Shade with the rather glitzy. If I can find the right picture for you, you might remember the most golden suturine on the planet. That was by Paul Storr. So again, he's represented in this show. Georgia, do you want to say anything? Oh, we've also, not that the whole exhibition is about, my exhibition, but at the bottom you might remember the Gerald Benny cigarette case with a very distinctive kind of textured surface. And here we have a peppermill featuring that same texture, which is...
So Gerald Benny is hugely significant in contemporary silversmithing. So he taught at the Royal College of Art in the 70s, and he taught that not only does something have to be really well made, so he insisted for the first time that there be a technician there 5 days a week, all day long, to help the makers make sure that everything was perfectly made. But he also instilled this idea that you have to have an individual style, and his was what's now referred to as Benny bark, which is this hammered texturing. But all of the people that he taught are now kind of the leading light in contemporary silver. And what's lovely about it, I used to manage a paintings gallery, and fine artists don't seem to be half as kind of willing to collaborate and pass on the skills. I think maybe that's the idea, that it is a bit of a dying craft, and they're so willing to, they want to keep it alive, so they're really, so now Gerald Benny's, what's the word? Pupils, that's the word, are passing on their own skills to the next generation, which is lovely.
Yeah. So who in particular, is there anyone represented in this show who studied with Benny? Is it
loads.
Is it
so it's Malcolm Appleby, Michael Lloyd, Jane Short.
Yeah. So people very associated with texture and silversmithing as well.
Well, it's not just texture. It's that they all have excelled at a particular. But he said, have your own unique style and just work at that. So Jane Short is probably the master enameler. Yeah. Michael Lloyd, chaser. Rod Kelly, Malcolm Appleby, engraver.
Yeah.
So they've all been asked to make a beaker, but the way that they respond to that, I mean, they all look completely different. So you'll see that, you can't really see that here, but you will see it when you see the actual objects.
This probably doesn't translate as well to a PowerPoint as it will when you see the objects, I think.
That's and then I've just included some fun things from the collection that relate to drinking. So the piece at the bottom specifically, this was made when the bells that lined the canopy when Charles II was coronated, these silver bells were melted down, and that occasion was commemorated by turning it into a tankard. So that's in the exhibition. And then the strange wager cup, which goes back to 15th century Germany. Originally, they'd have been used
so it's the figure of a lady, basically.
It's it's normally a lady. This actually refers to our demi-lady, which is in our coat of arms. But this is a Victorian version, and they would have originally been used for wedding ceremonies. So it's hard to explain here, but when you see the object mounted, the small cup moves as the skirt is actually another cup, so once it's upside down, the other cup tilts, and so the idea was that the groom drank out of the big cup and the bride out of the smaller one, and they tilted at the same angle, and they had to drink without spilling anything. I just wanted to include these strange things that we have in the collection. Basically. Again, this is just showing, we have these things called court cups, which are used, the court is basically our equivalent to a board of directors, and when they become a court member, they get to commission their own cup for use at the hall, so I wanted to include some of those. This just basically shows the idea of tea ceremony. So the top one is a tea urn that's got 3 spouts, so it would have sat in the middle of a tea table and encouraged lots of people to use it at the same time. But I also wanted to show that makers are still responding to making these things. So 2008, Linda Robertson was inspired by stacking pebbles in Japanese tea gardens, and so that informed this piece here. Again, so I'm constantly trying to connect what's happened in the past to what's happening today, but also show how function plays its part. So obviously, before we had electricity and gas, everything was lit by candlelight, so these were very functional pieces. Then it moved on to, after kind of the Renaissance salts with a centerpiece in the table, large candelabrum like you'll see upstairs, so this is a huge Paul Storr piece, kind of replaced that, so candelabrum would have been the centerpieces on the table. So although gas had been introduced, they still were used and then became more kind of decorative than functional, and then that carries on obviously until today, and going down to this piece at the bottom, which is really sculptural, but she still plays on the idea of the kind of the atmosphere that candlelight makes, so that would have a tea light in it, and then the reflections through the bowl is what she's inspired by.
So the final section about dining.
So I mean, I might just go on to the spoons. We've got a selection of spoons dating back from 1627 all the way to
I know, it'll be music to your ears, more spoons.
I didn't really want to go into too much detail about the history and significance of spoons because, yes. But I basically, again, just wanted to show that all of these were made in exactly the same way. They were all hand forged, and I found a maker, Rebecca de Quinn, who's also on the main table display, who makes her spoons in exactly the same way, down to the fact that she still uses a lead spoon sinker. Most people still now use kind of a resin, but she still uses what would have been used 1627.
So, talk us through the process, because...
So forging is basically, as opposed to raising, where you have a sheet of silver, which you then score and kind of raise up to a shape using hammers. Forging is basically a bar of silver. So you're compressing the metal into a shape rather than stretching and raising it out, you're compressing it. So there's actually a film that accompanies the exhibition that will be online. And you'll see Rebecca making a spoon in that. So through a process of just hammering for hours and hours, she compresses that shape, and then once she gets the kind of the head of the spoon to a flat, rounded shape, she'll then use what's called a spoon sinker. So it will she has kind of a carved out thing for it to go into, and then a rounded hammer that will start to make that bowl shape.
Well, and I think the film is a really nice thing to look at alongside our models of spoons in the drawer in the Posnick Gallery, where you can see the sort of different stages of a spoon being made. But to actually see somebody doing it using the tools, it really gives you a different take and a different understanding, I think, of how that process actually works practically.
And she's having to heat the metal, every few minutes, because through hammering it, it hardens, and so she has to heat it back up. It's called annealing. So you heat it up again, and it becomes soft. These are again just basically some pieces in the collection. This doesn't really do it justice. We'll show you.
I know. Upstairs. When you see them, I think you'll be really impressed.
Again, it was just trying to say how the influence of particular people and how design has started to lead. So, I mean, the piece at the bottom is called a bowl, but when you'll see it, I'm not sure anyone would actually want to use that.
I would want to
as a bowl. So it's
my cereal
as a bowl. I mean, what I'm trying to say with this is that although it has a function, it is just a sculptural piece in its own right.
Again, some of the names here will be familiar to you from Silver, Light and Shade. So Kevin Gray, who made the piece at the bottom, this is actually a much larger scale piece than the one we had in that exhibition. And it's also really nice to be able to represent other sort of key names in the history of design. So Christopher Dresser at the top here, this wonderful tureen from him that shows that sort of simplicity of his styles, sort of influenced by sort of Japanese design and kind of, but to make a really beautiful piece. And I think when you see the mounts in the show as well, you'll see that they really focus in on the use of the objects. They really try and show you and unpack the object in a way that really helps you to understand how it was actually used.
I think that's basically it. These pieces were all commissioned for use at the hall, so I wanted to show the idea of quantity. So these are no longer used, but it shows that at that time, the banquets that we would have had at the hall would have had endless things that needed serving. So they're no longer used, but it's a showing that history.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure some of us could find a use for pudding trowel. I probably could.
I just looked up pudding trowel.
Yeah, it's a great term. So one of the other elements alongside the objects are these photographs that Georgia mentioned, which were commissioned to actually put these objects in a sort of different kind of context. So a sort of food historian called Tasha Marks actually basically did a styled shoot, actually incorporating some of these objects into still life photographs.
Well, again, I wanted to label all of the objects that were on the table, but I wanted to do it in a way that wasn't without interfering with the object, so without having a label or a number on the table. So this shows you what the object is, and then each photograph has the caption for who made it and what it is on the actual framed image that you'll see upstairs. And also just to make it, because we wanted it to be a sort of relatively kind of domestic setting, so all of the framed images kind of also help that feeling.
Yeah. So here, these are actually the ones that we selected for postcards as well. And here are the other two. So you'll see the full-size photographic prints upstairs. But I think they also speak to our collection. So you'll will probably look again at still life painting in the ballroom, which is actually opposite these photographs, really trying to draw out that connection. But also our next exhibition in the Roper Gallery is Dutch Masterpieces from the National Trust. So we're also thinking about how that show relates to this one as well, if you can imagine the sort of context in which some of these silver objects might have been seen. So there's another sort of element of that, which is this book, which actually includes prints of all of the photographs of the photographs by Tasha Marks and showing these objects. So I'm going to pass this around as well, but this will also be in the gallery for people to actually look more closely at these objects, look at the pieces and find out who made the specific pieces as well. So I'm just going to pass that one around too.
And Tasha was also asked, so we basically, we gave her a brief for these images, but then also said, could you give us something else that responds to the objects? And was the soundscape. So there'll be music playing with the table installation, which is basically a composer that's brought together all the sounds of silver being used as percussion, which is a bit strange, but
yeah, I think by the end of the exhibition in the curatorial office, we might be like turning it down, you know. But just to warn you, the sound is not up there now, so that'll be a surprise for the next time you come into the gallery. So one of the other things that the Goldsmiths Company have done for the different venues is actually invite visitors to the show to enter a prize draw, which actually results in quite a fun activity for the winner. Do you want to talk more about that?
So I was really, when I was talking about Rebecca de Quinn, who's the spoon maker that's in the film, so I went to her workshop last summer and filmed her for the exhibition. And just the process of making a spoon, I just thought it would be really fun for somebody to actually do that. So at each venue, and we will have somebody as well here. We're going to think about a way that we'll do a prize draw.
So basically, we'll have we can invite visitors to sort of fill in their details, and they'll be entered into a prize draw, and then some lucky winner will be making a spoon with a silversmith. So that's quite a fun sort of additional thing.
But just to show you how difficult it actually is, and this is with.
Shall I go to the next one?
Yeah. These are the spoons that they made.
I think they're quite, stylish.
Yeah.
But George pointed out, because they've got the hallmarks of the maker who actually taught them how to make the spoons, maybe in 100 years people will think that the spoon maker made these. You never know. So, and just finally, we've got, it's actually included in the gallery guide that I've been passing around, but just to highlight the different events that we've got during this show. One thing to say is the show is actually not on for a really long time. The vagaries of programming schedules and the exhibition's actually going on to a number of other venues, including the Goldsmiths Centre in July. So the show is on until the 1st of July, so it's a kind of, I feel like, I don't know how many weeks that is actually. It's not very many weeks.
No.
I feel like, because I know Miss Tanner's opening before then, it feels like not very many weeks at all. But anyway, we've got a really fantastic series of events that will be going on during the exhibition. George is going to be doing a talk about the exhibition and the process behind it, the thinking behind the show. There's also going to be an event which where I'll be showing people around, and it's a kind of evening dining event to sort of, we'll also be offering a discount in the shop on silver, so that should be quite a fun way to, for those of you who want to build on your silver collections, that's the one for you. But we're also really thrilled to have Tasha Marks, who we mentioned who did the styling of the photographs, has actually designed a Golden Age aroma tour, which is based on this show and also the Dutch masterpieces. So she's actually creating a sort of sensory experience for people to kind of look anew perhaps at the historic art. So that should be a really kind of interesting event and quite a new thing for us, because we've not worked with her before, but I think she's, I know when I was at the V&A, she did some fantastic events that were really about bringing things alive in quite unusual ways. So it's really exciting that we've got her coming. And also, you may remember from Silver Light and Shade, we did a ring in a day workshop where you could actually make a ring in a day. That's what it says on the tin. But that's run by Bishopsland, which is another sort of centre for training of young silversmiths, or not necessarily young silversmiths, I should say up-and-coming silversmiths. So that's a really kind of lovely opportunity as well. So just to flag up that those are all taking place.